Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. My questions to the Premier. 7 years ago, during her brief but eventful tenure as Minister of Children and Family Development, she introduced legislation creating Community Living BC. She said, and I quote, that it will give British Columbians with developmental disabilities and their families better options and more opportunities in their communities. They'll be able to look forward to a safer, healthier, and better quality of life. However, the government has achieved the opposite and is now proposing $22 million in cuts to the services of people with developmental disabilities. So the question to the Premier is, do those families, are they included in her Families First agenda?
Premier of the Province of British Columbia.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. First, I should note, because although I was able to had the privilege of introducing that legislation as Minister of Children and Families in 2004, it was the hard work with the community that represents families who have a member who may be living with a disability. It was the member for South Surrey White Rock who spent hours and hours and hours bringing this legislation to life, so that people who are living with a disability or who are living with a disability in their family network have support and are able to make many of those decisions themselves. And I think he deserves the honour for having introduced CLBC, which has been a dramatic change. Dramatic and necessary change in how we deal with, how we connect with and engage with people who are struggling with a disability. And you know, since then, the budget for that ministry, for that area of the ministry, has gone up every single year. The budget is now $701 million. It went up from last year almost $9 million. It's taken on more clients this year than last, and the budget has continued to increase.
Leader of the Opposition has a supplemental.
The Premier was talking to those families. She knows that they believe hope is fading away. This government, since last fall, has closed 55 group homes in British Columbia. 55. That has an impact on people, surely. Per client funding has been cut by almost $6,000 since 2006. So my question to the Premier is she going to do anything about that? Is she going to address the issues that the groups involved and the families involved are expressing every single day? Do they have any place in her Families First agenda?
Hear, hear. Premier.
I was talking to some folks outside today as we were all enjoying the gifts of the farm families that were provided to us today. And someone stopped me and said he was delighted that for the first time in decades, he hears people in government talking about families. It wasn't something that the New Democrats talked about all through the 1990s, because it wasn't something apparently that they valued. I recognize that it is an incredible challenge for any family to have a member that lives with a disability. It's an incredibly challenging place to be, and our government does our best to try and support them. We don't always get it perfectly right, and we need to make sure that we are doing always the best that we can. We will continue to work with the families who face challenges, and part of that is making sure that we're continuing to grow the budget for this area of the ministry. Those needs continue to grow as the client population continues to age, and the numbers of people who need help are signed on to the programs. We need to make sure we're there for those families, and we will make sure we're there for those families.
Leader of the Opposition has a further supplemental.
Well, the Premier talks about families. The actual families involved are seeing their services cut off. Well, the Premier talks about families. she and her government are closing 55 group homes in British Columbia. Well, she talks about families. She's cutting per family funding. So the question is, this is a very straightforward question, will she put a stop to the closing of group homes? And will she, oh, I know the Minister of Finance is very interested in this. Will she, Honourable Speaker, will she end, for example, the government's HST advertising and use some of that money to keep group homes open?
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we are continuing to add new clients to the roles of people who are helped at CLBC. We're continuing to add almost $9 million to the budget for that area of the ministry, and we're working with those families. And you know, there is a substantial difference, though, in the way that our government approaches the provision of services and the way that their government approached it. We believe that the only way you can continue to provide services for the people who need them in British Columbia, and we've continued to grow these budgets for services that families depend on, is if you grow the economy. If you make sure that there are jobs, that there is economic growth, and there is revenue growth. Opposition had his way, we would go back to a province where 50,000 people had to leave because they couldn't find jobs. 50,000 people who didn't pay taxes, and 50,000 people whose taxes weren't going to support the incredibly important services that people with disabilities depend on us to provide. I think that our recipe on this side of the House for prosperity is the way that we can make sure that families are looked after in the long term.
Member of Squamish Railroads.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, Colleen Matthews has been trying to get orthotics for her adult daughter, Melissa. I'm sure the Premier is familiar with the story. It's been in the press. Ministry staff who are struggling without adequate resources have told her they cannot provide these for Melissa. In fact, a staff member called Colleen to say, "I'm at a loss. The ministry cannot afford to pay unless Melissa has open sores on her feet." Their advice to Colleen was to reapply and make sure that her physician stated on the form that there's a risk of amputation. Now, Colleen's a very honest woman and is stunned by this message that she should be dishonest in filling out this form. So I'd like to ask the Premier, under her Families First, if this is an appropriate way to treat a family with a need like this.
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we are putting families first in this government. We are putting families first. We are focusing on job creation, and we are focusing on opening up government and listening to people. So if the member wants to know if we are interested in listening to people, absolutely we are. And I think the thing that we all need to remember in challenging economic times is that if we want to be able to continue the high levels of service and improve service that we provide for people who rely on government, as we should, then we need to make sure we're continuing to grow our economy. We need to make sure that we are fulfilling both sides of our obligation, growing the economy, growing the amount of revenue to government, and therefore being able to continue to grow budgets for ministries, as we have done for areas of ministries like CLBC, which has grown by almost $9 million this year over last.
The member has a supplemental.
I do. Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, through you to the Premier. While I'm sure Colleen Matthews will be really happy to hear you're listening, she'd actually like you to take action. Carolyn Mavridos is another constituent of mine who has two boys, twins, who suffer from Down syndrome. Their services have been cut to the point where she can no longer work outside the house to provide support for them. And she knows that in 2 years when they graduate from school, they will receive a mere 12 hours a week in services. This does not allow her to go out and support her family, and in fact, her boys will be at risk. And so, again to the Premier, I'd like to know how, under her family's first agenda, she addresses the needs of either one of these two constituents of mine.
Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we have a deep commitment on this side of the House to doing the absolute best we can for families that depend on government to provide services. And that's why we've seen the budgets for almost all of the service provision ministries grow so much since 2001. You've certainly seen the health ministry budget grow. We have seen the education budget grow. We've seen the budget for CLBC grow as well. And the member comes up with all of these questions about how we will do these things. And my answer, I guess, should be, how would they do any of these things? How is it that the NDP would manage to be able to provide services for the people in British Columbia who so desperately need them when their plan is to shrink the economy, when their plan is to put people all across the province out of work, when their plan is to reduce the amount of revenue that's available to government to pay for these services? Because if that's their plan, I don't think that's the plan British Columbians want. I think British Columbians want to know we'll grow revenue and be able to continue to provide those very necessary services.
Member for Kootenay West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A Williams Lake family has told us that they can expect, has been told that they can expect up to a three-year wait for residential care for their father. John Turline has been in Kamloops Hospital since last October, over 3 hours away from his family. In March, he was designated as a long-term care patient. They were told in April he would be moved, and again in May he would be moved, and now probably not till the fall, and in reality, there could be up to a 3-year wait for a long-term care bed need for him. Mr. Turling is the unfortunate victim of the BC Liberal government that has abandoned its commitment to seniors. This is what happens when a government closes residential beds at a time when needs are growing and does not adequately replace them. Mr. Speaker, what happened to the BC Liberals' commitment to ensure seniors were treated with dignity?
Minister of Health.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and to the member. As always, I am interested in pursuing individual cases to ascertain what the particular circumstances are. But in general, and the member knows this from the lengthy conversation we engaged in just a few days ago in the estimates debate, the average wait time for seniors obtaining residential care in this province over the last 10 years has been reduced dramatically. Dramatically, Mr. Speaker. And that is as a result of the construction of thousands upon thousands of new beds, new homes, new facilities to care properly for seniors so that they can have a dignified end-of-life situation where they live, Mr. Speaker. So there has been a tremendous amount of work done. There is more work taking place, but as always, I am happy to take information from the member and explore whether an individual case requires additional attention.
The member has supplemental.
Well, yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Turling's daughter, Kimberly, has been pleading with anyone who will listen to get service for her father. She's been talking to sending letters to the Minister of Health, a member from Caribou-Coton, member for Caribou North, member for Kamloops South Thompson, member for Kamloops North, and hasn't been getting anything. She's trying to figure out how the government could be so callous. In fact, Kim writes, "I'm sharing this story to encourage the government to make the changes necessary so that other families do not have to feel the disappointment that our family has experienced with the current current healthcare crisis. Mr. Speaker, my question is simple. When will the Health Minister ensure people like Mr. Turlock get the services they deserve and need?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And again, I want to emphasize to the member, to the House, and British Columbians generally, that the importance that the government attaches to ensuring that there are proper, comfortable facilities available for seniors as they move towards their end of life is reflected in the fact that there are over 6,000 new beds that have been constructed, Mr. Speaker. And a total of over 12,500 that have been refurbished. Mr. Speaker, this is in an aging demographic. This is obviously an important need that communities across British Columbia have. We have addressed that need in a significant and a dramatic way. There are, I'm advised, additional factors that the member hasn't disclosed in this question, but I'm happy to look at the situation as always, to ensure the needs of all families and all individuals are properly addressed.
Remind members to keep your questions to the point and answers to the point. Member for Caribou North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm uncertain as to which minister to direct this question to. So would either the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Forests, Lands and Natural Resource Operations, or the Minister of Energy please inform this House if approval has been given to Talisman Energy and Cambrium Energy for the diversion and pipeline removal of 7.3 billion litres of water out of the Williston Reservoir behind the WAC Bennett Dam.
Minister of Energy and Mines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll take the question on notice and I'll get back to the member.
The member has supplemental.
I do, Mr. Speaker, and it is a different question. That withdrawal is actually up on web pages. It is the worst kept secret in the South Peace. And what the question from that region is what is the public consultation process for a water withdrawal of that magnitude? Both First Nations and the general public would like to know from whatever the minister is that's appropriate for this, what is the process that the public can be engaged in the diversion and pipeline withdrawal of 7.3 billion litres per annum from the Williston Reservoir behind the WAC Bennett Dam.
Government House Leader.
I just want to first of
Members.
I just want to first of all assure the House, Honourable Speaker, that I charge no royalties for my modelling for the stickman. Through to the member opposite, there will be an extensive process of public consultation, discussion and negotiations with First Nations before anything would go ahead.
Member for Delta South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say that hundreds and hundreds of temporary water licenses have been issued in the Peace region by the Oil and Gas Commission with no First Nation consultation, and still more large water volume licenses are today being issued, again with no public consultation. Mr. Speaker, has any ministry conducted a baseline assessment of groundwater and surface water in the Peace region, and does any ministry track the cumulative withdrawal of water from all sources and for all reasons?
Government House Leader. Members.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and through the member opposite, I am advised that there are some studies ongoing that are going to deal with volumes of water. I know the member and I actually had a debate on radio, or she had a visit and I had a radio shortly after her on Sunday. We are looking at the water extraction. I can tell the member the reusing of water is way more substantial than the member actually has said publicly it is, the recycling of the water, and actually the management of waste at all our waste at our well sites is quite remarkable. In actual fact, Honourable Member, if we could take some of the applications, scientific application of how we handle waste and water recycling at well sites, we could use it actually domestically in other places in British Columbia for the environment as well.
The member has supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is that the wastewater is being recycled to some extent, but the bulk of it ends up on the surface, and there is no water treatment being handled at this point. Mr. Speaker, the simple fact is that the government does not have baseline data for water in this region, and no one agency tracks cumulative water demand, let alone reports out on this critical resource. Similarly, the government does not have data for the total toxic wastewater created by the industry, the greenhouse gas implications of shale gas development, or the cumulative health and safety impacts of oil and gas development. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Premier if she will commit today to doing what other jurisdictions have done and take a comprehensive look at the development of this resource by striking a special committee of this legislature.
Government House Leader.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, Mr. Speaker, in British Columbia about 10 years ago, we had about 10-year supply of natural gas. Today we have over a 100-year supply of natural gas to help feed our economy, create investment, create jobs, create dollars for healthcare and education because of the innovation and the environmentally very friendly and very disciplined work done by our oil and gas sector in British Columbia for the future of the province of British Columbia. And I'm actually very proud of the fact that we may be the only jurisdiction that actually understands shale gas at the level we do, and the job that we do with it, and how we do it with environmentally friendly. And as we go forward, we will continue to investigate and to learn more to make sure that we protect the environment while actually at the same time developing a very significant resource for the people of the province of British Columbia.
Member for Columbia River Revelstoke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Golden and other BC border communities, there are fundraisers to help families displaced by the recent firestorm in Slave Lake, Alberta. As the wildfire season in British Columbia gets underway, we are reminded of how vulnerable our communities are. In early 2004, recommendations on interface fuel management were made to reduce the risk of wildfire to our communities. So to the minister responsible, is it acceptable to the minister that after 7 years, only 2% of the interface area identified for fuel management has been treated?
Minister of Forest, Lands and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. And it does provide me the opportunity, firstly, to recognize the great work of our firefighters, the men and women in our firefighters. We have over 600 of our firefighters have been are working in Alberta, working in rotation. We've also just deployed a crew into the Yukon and Alaska to help out our neighbors. So this is great work being done by our firefighter service. And we take the issue of wildfire threat very, very seriously. That's why I was very pleased recently to be able to announce $25 million additional support for the community wildfire mitigation program. That's $25 million over 2 years for communities in British Columbia in partnership through UBCM. We will continue to work very closely with local governments and with First Nations in addressing the wildfire threat to our communities.
The member has supplemental.
Certainly. Just so members of the House understand, that $50 million was spent over 7 years to get 2% of the work done. And I think all members would understand that an additional $25 million is not going to complete the job. These are serious issues. We saw similar devastation from wildfire in Kelowna. That was 8 years ago. At that time, Gary Filmon was requested by the government to promptly provide a report with recommendations intended to mitigate risks to communities.
Members.
The government promised that these recommendations would be implemented immediately. The government has a responsibility to protect communities at risk from wildfire. Treatment that has been done to date has not even begun to protect those communities. So to the minister, will he commit to a new strategy and a new sense of urgency to deal with fuel management in the interface forest?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the Community Wildfire Management Program, as the member opposite referenced, $37 million to communities in partnership with communities. That's leveraged investment in the communities. 240 communities and First Nations have got plans that are in place or being implemented. The additional funding, $25 million over 2 years, working in partnership with local communities with First Nations. We will continue to work with them in the Wildfire Management Program. In addition, our Wildfire Management branch works with communities in terms of training. We provided support through the Job Opportunities Fund in partnership with the federal government in terms of providing additional training and support. We provided support for purchase of infrastructure protection devices. We'll continue to work very closely with local governments as we protect families and First Nation communities in British Columbia.
For Burnaby Deer Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We already know there is a critical shortage of judges, prosecutors, and sheriffs in our justice system. And yet this past Friday, the BC Liberal government cut 28 full-time auxiliary sheriffs, and an additional 24 deputy sheriffs have had their hours cut down to 75%, for a net loss of 34 full-time positions. This, despite warnings by judges that they cannot operate potentially dangerous and volatile courtrooms without security. We know the result will be more cases thrown out of court and that more accused will get off. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Attorney General: why on earth are dozens of sheriffs being cut from a court system which is already dangerously understaffed?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member is referring to auxiliary sheriffs, and it's true a number of changes were announced last week in terms of our staffing complement. Our number one priority remains the safety and security of our courtrooms and our court facilities, but we are also living within a budget, something that might be a novel concept to the members of the opposition, certainly based on my experience when I was here and saw how they operated in the 1990s. Mr. Speaker, every single day of the week, these members stand up and say, just spend more money. Doesn't matter what the issue is, just spend more money. Then they turn around and they say they're campaigning to go back to a 12% PST GST, which will not only be worse for consumers, but will deprive government revenues of $3 billion. $3 billion in the next couple of years. Tell me, Mr. Speaker, how they would fund additional services of every kind that they always mention with $3 billion less to spend.
Members. The member has supplemental.
I do, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Well, they were auxiliary sheriffs as well as deputy sheriffs. They were both. Mr. Speaker, most of those auxiliary sheriffs were hired in January. They received weeks of training paid for by the taxpayers. Now, after a few short months, that training is completely wasted. 34 less sheriffs and trials being thrown out. 2 courtrooms in Kelowna were shut down because no sheriff was able to provide security or escort prisoners. Another 8 families that were waiting to seek access to their children had to wait for court delays because of sheriff shortages. To the Attorney General, how do these cuts aid our ailing judicial system?
Attorney.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I dispute the member's characterization that training and education is a waste. I think that's completely inappropriate. what we have informed those staff that the member refers to, and it's a number of them, is that they will not be getting as much work in the future as they were most recently. We will still utilize them when we're able to. But Mr. Speaker, the member hasn't answered the question, which is how would you hire more sheriffs, spend more in healthcare, more in education, more on roads, reduce ferry fares, reduce camping fees, and do anything else in the public service with $3 billion less to spend, which is what they're campaigning for right now. Right now is what they're campaigning for, Mr. Speaker, a 12% PST and GST, while on this side of the House, we want a 10% single HST.
Bell ends question period.